The studio lights burned bright, casting a warm glow over the sleek set of the Kelly Clarkson Show. The audience buzzed with anticipation, their chatter a low hum as the cameras rolled into position. Kelly Clarkson, all smiles and effortless charm, leaned forward in her chair, her eyes locked on her guest. Jelly Roll, the country rap star, sat across from her, his broad frame filling the seat, tattoos peeking out from under his rolled-up sleeves. His easy grin masked a flicker of unease, like he sensed the conversation was about to take a turn. Kelly, known for her ability to make anyone feel like an old friend, started with the usual playbook. She tossed out a question about his latest album, Whitsett Chapel, praising its raw honesty. Jelly Roll nodded, his voice low and gravelly as he talked about pouring his life into the music. The struggles of his past, the addiction, the prison time, the redemption. The audience ate it up, clapping at all the right moments. But Kelly wasn't one to stay surface level for long. She tilted her head, her smile sharpening just a touch, and asked, "So, how do you handle the critics who say your music glorifies the street life too much, but it's not setting the right example?" The question hung in the air like a spark near dry grass. Jelly Roll's grin faltered, just for a second, before he leaned back, rubbing his hands together. "Look, Kelly, my music's about truth. I'm not glorifying anything. I'm telling my story, what I've lived through. If that makes people uncomfortable, that's their problem, not mine." His tone was steady, but there was an edge to it, a warning. The audience shifted. Sensing the shift in the air, Kelly didn't back down. She leaned in closer, her voice still warm but pointed. "Sure, but don't you think there's a responsibility when you've got millions of fans, especially young ones, looking up to you? They hear those stories, and some might think that's the path to follow." Jelly Roll's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. He wasn't here to be put on trial. "I'm not a role model, Kelly. I'm an artist. I don't tell kids to go do what I did, I tell them how I survived it." The crowd murmured, a mix of agreement and unease. Kelly, undeterred, pressed on. "But when you're in the spotlight, people don't always hear the survival part. They hear the chaos, the drama. Don't you ever worry about that?" It was less a question and more a challenge. Her eyes locked on his, unblinking. The tension was palpable now, the studio feeling smaller, the lights hotter. Jelly Roll shifted in his seat, his hands gripping the armrests. "I'm not here to sanitize my life for nobody," he said, his voice rising just enough to carry weight. "You want me to lie about who I am? That's not real. That's not me." The audience clapped, but it was scattered, uncertain. Kelly's smile didn't waver, but her eyes had a glint, like she knew she'd struck a nerve and wasn't done yet. "I'm just saying," she continued, "there's power in what you put out there. You've got a platform. People listen." Jelly Roll leaned forward now, his voice low but intense. "You think I don't know that? I'm out here trying to save people, not lead them astray. But I ain't gonna sugarcoat my truth to make it easier for folks to swallow." The crowd was split, some cheering his raw honesty, others shifting uncomfortably. Kelly opened her mouth to respond, but the stage manager signaled for a commercial break. The cameras cut, and the audience exhaled, but the air between Kelly and Jelly Roll crackled with unfinished business, as the crew bustled around, resetting. For the next segment, Jelly Roll's eyes stayed fixed on Kelly, like he was weighing his next move. The studio lights dimmed slightly as the commercial break stretched on, but the tension between Jelly Roll and Kelly Clarkson lingered like a storm cloud. The audience, still buzzing from the exchange, whispered among themselves, their eyes darting. Between the two stars, Jelly Roll sat back in his chair, arms crossed, his face a mix of defiance and frustration. Kelly, ever the professional, chatted lightly with the producer, but her glances toward Jelly Roll betrayed her awareness of the brewing conflict. The stage manager called for places, and the cameras rolled back on, the audience settling into an expectant hush. Kelly flashed her signature smile, but it was tighter now, less effortless. "Welcome back, everybody," she said, her voice bright but carrying an undercurrent of purpose. "We're here with Jelly Roll, talking about his music, his life, and the impact he's making." She turned to him, her posture open but her eyes sharp. "Before the break, we were discussing your platform, your influence. Let's dig a little deeper. You've said you want to save people with your music, but some say the stories you tell, they can romanticize the struggle. How do you balance that?" Jelly Roll's expression hardened, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the armrest. "Kelly, I don't romanticize nothing. I'm not out here writing fairy tales. I'm talking about real pain, real mistakes, real redemption. You keep circling back to this idea that I'm leading people wrong, but you're missing the point. My music's for the people who already feel lost, not for the ones judging from the sidelines." His voice was steady, but the edge was sharper now, each word deliberate. The audience leaned in, caught in the intensity of his conviction. Kelly nodded, her lips pursed, like she was weighing her next move. "I hear you," she said, her tone softer but still probing. "But when you're on a stage this big, don't you think about the kids who might hear your songs and think the hustle, The streets, that's the way to go. I mean, you've got a daughter. What do you tell her about the life you've lived? The mention of his daughter hit like a jab. Jelly Roll's eyes flashed, and he leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low growl. My daughter knows her daddy's truth. She knows I fought to be better for her. Don't bring her into this to make a point. The audience gasped softly. The air growing thick, Kelly's face flickered with surprise, but she recovered quickly. I'm not trying to make it personal, she said, her hands raised slightly. I'm just saying, as a parent, you get how people worry about what kids take from music, from stories like yours. Jelly Roll shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping. You're still doing it, Kelly. You're framing it like I'm out here selling chaos to kids. I'm telling people they can climb out of the dark, not stay in it. His voice rose, carrying a raw frustration that silenced the room. Kelly leaned back, her smile gone now, replaced by a look of determination. I'm not framing anything. I'm asking questions people have, questions your fans deserve answers to. The crowd was split again, some clapping for her persistence, others murmuring in support of Jelly Roll. He stared at her, his chest rising and falling, like he was wrestling with whether to keep going or shut it down. You want answers? He said finally, his voice low and tight. Then let's talk about something real, not this narrative you're pushing. The stage manager's hand hovered near the control booth. Sensing the segment teetering on the edge, Kelly's eyes locked on his unyielding, as the air grew heavy with the weight of what might come next. The studio felt like a pressure cooker, the air thick with the unspoken challenge hanging between Jelly Roll and Kelly Clarkson. The audience sat on edge, their murmurs fading into a tense silence as the cameras stayed locked on the two. Jelly Roll's last words, calling out the narrative he felt Kelly was pushing, lingered like a gauntlet thrown down. His eyes burned with a mix of defiance and exhaustion, while Kelly held his gaze, her expression a blend of resolve and curiosity, like she was daring him to keep going. Kelly leaned forward, her voice calm but firm, cutting through the charged atmosphere. All right, let's talk about something real then. You say your music is about climbing out of the dark, but some people, they hear the pain in your songs and they stay there. They don't hear the redemption. How do you make sure that message gets through, especially when the industry loves to amplify the drama? It was a fair question, but the way she framed it, with that slight tilt of her head, felt like another test. The audience waited, breath held, for Jelly Roll's response. He rubbed his face, exhaling sharply, like he was trying to keep his temper in check. Kelly, you keep coming at this like I'm out here trying to sell pain. I don't control how people hear my music. I can't make them listen to the whole story. But I'm not gonna stop telling it just cause some folks miss the point. His voice was raw, each word carrying the weight of years spent fighting to be understood. The industry, yeah, they love drama. But I'm not playing their game. I'm not here to be their poster boy for chaos. The crowd erupted in scattered applause, some nodding in solidarity, others still unsure. Caught between the two forces on stage, Kelly's eyes softened for a moment, but she didn't back down. I get that, she said, her tone measured. But you're not just fighting the industry, you're in a world where every word, every lyric, gets dissected. People look at you, your past, and they make judgments. How do you deal with that kind of scrutiny? It was a pivot, a chance to bring the conversation back to common ground. But Jelly Roll wasn't taking the olive branch. Scrutiny, he let out a short, bitter laugh, leaning back in his chair. I've been judged my whole life, Kelly, by cops, by judges, by people who never walked a day in my shoes. You think I care what some critic says about my music? I care about the kid in the back row who feels like he's drowning, who hears my song and knows he's not alone. His voice cracked slightly, not from weakness but from the intensity of his conviction. The audience erupted again, louder this time, some standing to cheer. Kelly nodded, her lips pressed together, like she was processing his words but still had more to say. That's powerful, she said, her voice quieter now. But when you're in that spotlight, those judgments don't just come from critics. They come from fans, from parents, from people who want to know who you are now, not just who you were. She paused, her eyes searching his. So who is Jelly Roll today? The survivor, the artist, or something else? The question landed like a punch, and for a moment, Jelly Roll was still, his hands clenched in his lap. The studio was silent, the weight of her words sinking in. He opened his mouth, then closed it, his jaw tight. You want to know who I am? He said finally, his voice low and dangerous. I'm the guy who's done with being put in a box for your show. He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor, and the audience gasped, the tension snapping like a taut wire. Kelly's eyes widened, but before she could speak, Jelly Roll turned, his footsteps heavy as he headed for the stage's edge. Jelly Roll's heavy footsteps echoed through the stunned silence of the studio as he strode toward the edge of the set. His broad shoulders tense, his face a mask of barely contained fury. The audience sat frozen, their gasps giving way to a low murmur of shock and anticipation. Kelly Clarkson, caught off guard, stood halfway out of her chair, her hands raised in a gesture that was part plea, part disbelief. "Wait, hold on, let's talk about this," she called after him, her voice carrying a mix of urgency and sincerity. But Jelly Roll didn't break his stride. The cameras swiveled frantically, trying to capture every angle of the unfolding chaos. As he reached the curtained exit, Jelly Roll paused, his hand gripping the fabric like he was steadying himself. He turned back, just enough for the audience to see the fire in his eyes. "I came here to talk about my music, not to be dissected like some case study," he said, his voice low but carrying across the studio. "You want to know who I am? Figure it out from my songs, not by twisting my words." The crowd erupted, some cheering his defiance, others whispering in confusion, unsure whether to side with his raw honesty or Kelly's probing questions. Kelly took a step forward, her expression a mix of frustration and determination. "Not twisting anything," she said, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "I'm trying to have a real conversation, to understand you, to let your fans understand you." She gestured toward the audience, who were now on their feet, some shouting encouragement, others calling for him to stay. But Jelly Roll shook his head, his jaw tight. "This ain't a conversation, Kelly. This is you putting me on trial for being me." With that, he pushed through the curtain, disappearing backstage, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. The stage manager signaled for another commercial break, and the cameras cut. But the energy in the room was electric, chaotic. The audience buzzed, some applauding Jelly Roll's exit, others debating whether Kelly had gone too far. Backstage, the crew scrambled, producers barking orders into headsets as they tried to figure out how to salvage the segment. Kelly stood, alone on the set, her hands on her hips, staring at the spot where Jelly Roll had vanished. For a moment, her polished host persona slipped, revealing a flicker of regret, maybe even hurt, before she composed herself and turned to the audience. "All right, folks," she said, forcing a smile as the cameras came back on. "That was intense. Let's take a breath and keep this show moving." The audience clapped, but it was hesitant, the air still thick with the aftershock of the clash. Kelly sat back down, smoothing her dress, but her eyes kept darting toward the curtain, like she half expected Jelly Roll to storm back out. The crew had managed to get word that he was still in the building, pacing in a green room, his team trying to calm him down. Whispers spread that he was debating whether to return or walk out for good. As Kelly transitioned to the next segment, introducing a lighter topic with a forced laugh, the tension lingered. The audience could feel it, the crew could feel it, and the viewers at home would no doubt feel it too. Social media was already lighting up, fans and critics alike, dissecting the exchange. Some praising Jelly Roll for standing his ground, others calling him oversensitive, while Kelly's supporters argued she was just doing her job. The question now wasn't just about what had happened, but what would happen next. Would Jelly Roll come back to finish the interview, or was this the end of the conversation? The studio lights burned on, but the real spotlight was on the green room door, where the next move was being decided. Backstage, the green room felt like a pressure valve about to blow. Jelly Roll paced the small space, his boots thudding against the floor, his hands running through his hair as his team hovered nearby, unsure whether to intervene or give him space. The walls seemed to close in, the hum of the studio muffled but still audible through the door. His manager, a wiry guy with a clipboard, tried to reason with him. "Look man, you go back out there, you control the narrative. You walk away now, they'll spin this however they want." Jelly Roll stopped, his eyes flashing. "They're already spinning it. She's out there making me sound like I'm glorifying the streets, like I'm not thinking about my fans. I'm done with that." Outside, the show rolled on, but the energy in the studio was fractured. Kelly Clarkson powered through her next segment, a cooking demo with a celebrity chef, her laugh a little too bright, her glances toward the backstage curtain a little too frequent. The audience played along, clapping on cue, but their attention kept drifting. Whispers circulating about whether Jelly Roll would return. Social media was a wildfire now, clips of the clash already going viral, fans posting side-by-side memes of Jelly Roll's fiery exit and Kelly's stunned expression. The divide was clear. Some saw him as a man standing up for his truth, others as a star, dodging accountability. In the green room, Jelly Roll's phone buzzed relentlessly. Texts from friends, his wife, even his daughter's mom, all urging him to keep his cool but back him no matter what. He tossed the phone onto a couch, his breath heavy. "I didn't sign up to be nobody's punching bag," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. His guitarist, leaning against the wall, spoke up. "You go back out there. You show him who you are. Don't let her frame this." Jelly Roll paused, his eyes narrowing like he was wrestling with the idea. The thought of letting Kelly's questions define the moment burned him. But so did the idea of walking away and letting the headlines write his story. Meanwhile, Kelly's producer slipped backstage during a quick break, her face tight with urgency. She knocked on the green room door, and Jelly Roll's manager let her in. "Kelly wants to talk," she said, her voice low. "Off camera, just you two." She doesn't want this to end like this. Jelly Roll looked at her, his expression unreadable. She should have thought about that before she kept pushing, he said, but there was a flicker of hesitation in his voice. The producer pressed on. She respects you, man. She's just doing her job, asking the hard questions. Give her a chance to clear the air. Jelly Roll didn't respond, his silence heavier than any words. Back on set, the show was nearing its final segment. Kelly wrapped up the cooking bit, her charm still intact but her energy strained, like she was carrying the weight of the earlier clash. The audience could sense the clock ticking, the question of Jelly Roll's return hanging over the room like a storm cloud. The stage manager signaled that they had just enough time for one more segment, and Kelly's eyes flicked to the curtain, again, her fingers tapping nervously on her chair. She knew the show needed a resolution, something to tie up the chaos. But whether Jelly Roll would give her that chance was anyone's guess. As the crew prepped for the final moments, word spread that Jelly Roll was still in the green room, door closed. His team huddled around him. The producer returned to Kelly, whispering an update, and her face tightened, a mix of hope and frustration. The audience, sensing the shift, grew restless, their murmurs growing louder. The cameras rolled back on, and Kelly faced them with a determined smile, ready to close out the show, but everyone in the room knew the real story was unfolding just beyond the curtain, where Jelly Roll's next move would decide how this clash would be remembered. The studio lights felt hotter now, the air heavy with anticipation as the Kelly Clarkson show barreled toward its close. Kelly stood center stage, her smile steady but her eyes betraying a flicker of uncertainty. The audience was restless. There, attention split between her and the backstage curtain, where the unresolved clash with Jelly Roll hung like an unfinished song. Social media was a frenzy, hashtags trending, fans arguing over who was right, who was wrong, and whether the show would end with a reconciliation or a permanent fracture. Backstage, the green room door remained closed, Jelly Roll still inside, his team's voices a low murmur as they debated his next move. Kelly took a deep breath, addressing the audience with her usual warmth, but there was a raw edge to her voice. Folks, today's been real, hasn't it? She said, a small laugh breaking the tension. We're about to wrap, but I want to say something before we go. I respect Jelly Roll, his story, his music. Sometimes these conversations get heated because they matter. I hope we can keep talking, offstage or on. The crowd clapped, some shouting support for her candor, others still glancing at the curtain, hoping for a dramatic return. In the green room, Jelly Roll sat on the edge of a couch, his elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. His manager relayed Kelly's words, caught from a monitor feed. She's leaving the door open, man, he said. You go back out, you get the last word. Jelly Roll's guitarist nodded, adding, you don't, they'll say you ran from it. Jelly Roll's eyes lifted, a spark of resolve cutting through his frustration. He stood, his movements deliberate, and grabbed his jacket. Ain't nobody gonna say I ran, he said, his voice low but firm. The team exchanged glances, sensing the shift, as he headed for the door. On stage, Kelly was mid-sentence, thanking the audience for their energy. When the curtain parted, the crowd erupted as Jelly Roll stepped back onto the set, his presence commanding, his face a mix of determination and guarded openness. Kelly's eyes widened, a genuine smile breaking through as she gestured for him to join her. Well, look, who's back, she said, her voice carrying a mix of relief and excitement. The audience roared, some standing, as Jelly Roll walked to the center of the stage, stopping just short of his chair. I ain't here to sit, he said, his voice steady, addressing both Kelly and the crowd. I came back to say one thing. My music, my life, it's not about glorifying nothing. It's about surviving, about hope. If you hear something else, that's on you. But I'm done letting anybody twist my story. The audience cheered, the sound swelling, as Kelly nodded, her hands clasped in front of her. I hear you, she said, her tone softer now, sincere, and I'm glad you came back to say it. Let's keep this real, always. She extended a hand, and after a beat, Jelly Roll shook it, the gesture firm but not warm. A truce, more than a resolution. The cameras caught every second, the moment electric, as the show cut to its final commercial. When the lights dimmed, Kelly and Jelly Roll exchanged a few quiet words. Off mic, their heads bowed together, the tension easing but not erased. The audience left buzzing. The internet exploded with reactions, and the clip of their handshake became the defining image of the day. Backstage, Jelly Roll grabbed his phone, ignoring the flood of notifications, and headed for the exit, his team trailing behind. Kelly stayed on set, waving to the last of the crowd, her smile tinged with reflection. The clash was over, but its echoes would linger, in the music, in the headlines, and in the stories people told about who Jelly Roll was and who he'd always be.